goes back a very long time, probably um, when I was a student at the University of Alabama in the middle to late 50s. And I was on campus when Authoring Lucy attempted to become a student at the university. And it was my first experience with seeing the Ku Klux Klan at work, see the violent upheavals that prejudice brought about on campus. And the year that she tried to come in, I was assistant to the director of the Wesley Foundation, which was a Methodist student organization. And I had taken a year off. And it was at that time, I lived at the foundation, and it was at that time that the Ku Klux Klan chose to present themselves at the foundation, objecting to our involvement in trying to find some, making the peace on campus. And of course, that was the beginnings of my ventures into a whole different world. And I've been at it ever since.
So something justice.
Well, the Klan was a new event. The upheaval of student protests was an event. And of course, the refusal on the part of governing bodies to accept her into the university was an event, all of which didn't make sense. And I got, of course, involved as the assistant to the director of the foundation. I got involved in some of the meetings that we had with student groups, and it was the beginning of a whole different way of looking at things.
Can you explain to us what you saw was wrong, what moved you about what was the climate at the time?
The violence, the capacity of a university where you go to learn about life was forcing a woman out. And because she wanted to study. And she already had a college degree. You know, it was not that she didn't have the capacity to do it. But I just never knew that there was that kind of discrimination, in spite of the fact that I lived in Birmingham for years, many years, grew up there. I didn't know anything about all this race relations from the beginning. And Tuscaloosa, Alabama was where I went to school and where I found out about a whole different world. What, finding out about it? No. It was just the beginnings of having to look at something in a very different way. Having to deal with a diversity that I didn't know was on this planet, I guess, at that time. I grew up in ghetto, white ghetto. Um, I found out that there were other ways of seeing things.
I mean, when you found out about this, what struck you?
I don't know, I suppose probably the realization, which I had no awareness of before, that there could be such intense difference between people. The Klan burned their cross right outside where I was living. But it was just a beginning. It was just a beginning then. My next involvement, I suppose, was the March on Washington, which I became very involved in.
Why did you
Both preparatory. I had moved to New York by then, and I was a student at the Adelphi School of Social Work at that time, and the social workers had organized for the March on Washington, and much of the organization was done right here in Huntington. That was the first national event that I had gotten involved with. So it went from campus to nation, and then on to Selma, which was state. And all of the politics behind these things became much more defined for me. Or I began to define them in my own mind. I suspect all of that politic has been there for many, many, many years. I just wasn't aware of it.
Why did you become involved in something?
Well, partly because of my involvement in the civil rights movement prior to Selma, partly because the minister in this fellowship was killed in Selma. I wanted to go down. Partly because I had lived in Selma 6 years earlier and worked in Selma. And it was like, I thought I could go back home and see what was happening there. By that time I went down, there were already 2 people that had been severely, well, Jimmy Lee Jackson had already died. The minister in our fellowship from our UU, I think he died while I was down there. No, he would have died before I got there. And then Teresa Liuzzo died after I had participated in the march.